It sounded like a fighter jet on the highway. In the early 1960s, an uncanny high-pitched whine echoed through city streets as a sleek, bronze hardtop coupe streaked past puzzled onlookers. This was Chrysler's experimental turbine car, a jet-age dream on wheels that could run on everything from gasoline to peanut oil, even tequila. Detroit built 50 of these jet-powered cars and loaned them to regular drivers, only to scrap nearly the entire fleet a few years later. How did this audacious project burn so brightly, only to fade away? This is the story of the Chrysler Turbine Car, the futuristic automotive fantasy that blazed briefly and then vanished. To understand the turbine car, we have to journey back to the 1950s and 60s, an era of unbridled technological optimism. America was in love with the jet age. Passenger jets were shrinking the world. The space race was in full swing, and cars grew sleek tail fins inspired by rockets. Detroit's automakers were dreaming big: nuclear-powered concept cars, rocket-like show vehicles. Nothing seemed impossible. It was in this spirit that Chrysler, one of the big three automakers, launched an ambitious program to reimagine the automobile using a gas turbine engine instead of a conventional piston engine. Chrysler's interest in turbine power actually began much earlier. During World War II, a talented engineer named George Hubner and his team started experimenting with turbine engines for aircraft. After the war, Hubner convinced Chrysler to explore putting a turbine in a car, a radical idea, but one with enticing advantages. A turbine had far fewer moving parts than a piston engine, and those parts spun smoothly instead of hammering up and down. In theory, a turbine car would need less maintenance, run super smoothly, and could burn almost any fuel. By the mid-1950s, Chrysler led the pack in gas turbine research, outpacing projects at General Motors and even Britain's Rover. The first milestone came in 1954, when Chrysler unveiled a turbine-powered Plymouth Belvedere. The turbine was shoehorned under the hood of what looked like a normal car, and yet it worked. In June 1954, Chrysler dramatically rolled out this turbine Plymouth in front of 500 reporters at its Chelsea proving grounds. The car drove under its own jet power, and the press was astonished. 2 years later, in 1956, Hubner himself piloted a second-generation turbine car on a 3,000-mile road trip from New York to Los Angeles. A convoy of mechanics followed with spare parts and fuel. But astonishingly, the high-tech car made the cross-country trek with only 2 minor non-engine repairs. This successful journey proved that a turbine could handle real roads, not just the test track. Off the back of that feat, Chrysler doubled down on its turbine program, moving it into a larger facility and devoting more engineers to the cause. Excitement was building. By the early 1960s, Chrysler had a fleet of turbine prototypes touring the world to show off the technology. They barnstormed across 90 U.S. cities and even Europe and Mexico, giving rides to almost 14,000 people and being seen by millions. Public reaction was enthusiastic. Chrysler's jet car was a sensation. At auto shows, the bronze-colored turbines drew huge crowds, and the message was clear: this was the car of the future. Riding that wave of interest, Chrysler's management made a bold decision. In 1963, they would stop merely modifying existing models with turbines and instead build a brand new car. styled from the ground up, around their latest turbine engine. And crucially, they would put this car into the hands of ordinary people to see how the concept worked in everyday life. Act 1, the development. Chrysler's dedicated turbine car was born in 1963, a two-door coupe simply named the Chrysler Turbine Car. On the outside, it looked like an upscale personal luxury car of the era, but with futuristic twists. Designer Elwood Engel, freshly hired from Ford, gave the turbine car a distinctly modern look. The silhouette and proportions were similar to Ford's Thunderbird. Engel had worked on the Thunderbird earlier, and indeed Chrysler hoped to compete with the T-Bird and even the Corvette in style. The turbine car's body was handcrafted by the famed Italian coach builder Gaia in Turin, Italy. Every exterior panel was finished in a metallic hue called turbine bronze, a rich root beer-colored paint that became the car's signature look. Chrome accents abounded, and the designers carried the jet theme throughout, from the deep recessed turbine-like taillights to the turbine-inspired hubcaps and dashboard gauges. Even the ignition key was unique. All 55 cars shared the same special turbine-embossed key design. Under the sleek hood lived the heart of the dream, Chrysler's fourth-generation turbine engine, the A831. This wasn't a rocket engine or a jet pushing the car with thrust. It was a gas turbine spinning a shaft that turned the wheels through a conventional torque-flight, 3-speed automatic transmission. In essence, Chrysler had packaged a small jet engine to drive a car's rear wheels. The technical specs were astounding for the time. The turbine spun up to 36,000 revolutions per minute to make about 130 horsepower. At idle, it still whirred at an incredible 18,000 to 22,000 revolutions per minute, far beyond what any piston engine could dream of. Yet it was described as eerily smooth and relatively quiet at low throttle. Peak torque was a whopping 425 pound-feet, available almost instantly once the turbine was spooled up. Unlike a regular car, the turbine car had no radiator, no fan, no coolant. The engine didn't need them. There were no pistons, no crankshaft, no valves bouncing around. Just a few rotating turbine blades and compressors. In fact, it used about 80% fewer moving parts than a piston engine. One reason the engineers believed it would be more durable and require less maintenance. The only spark plug was used just to ignite the fuel at startup. After that, the combustion was continuous, not impulses, so there was no need for a complex ignition system. Starting the turbine car was a ritual all its own. Drivers had to follow an 8-step procedure to bring the engine to life. Turn the key, wait for the ready light as the turbine spun up, then advance the throttle lever to introduce fuel, and so on. Done right, the turbine would start with a whoosh. Done wrong, it could result in a hot start that might damage the engine, a learning curve some drivers struggled with. Once running, the car idled with a distinct turbo whine. Many likened the sound to a jet engine spooling on the tarmac. In fact, Chrysler found about 60% of people in the user program loved the futuristic turbine sound, though about 20% found it annoying or too loud. Either way, when a turbine car pulled up, you heard it coming, an otherworldly whistle unlike any Detroit V8 rumble. One of the turbine engine's biggest selling points was its appetite for almost any flammable fuel. Engineers proudly demonstrated how versatile it was. Diesel, kerosene, heating oil, unleaded gasoline, jet fuel. It could burn them all. The only fuel off limits was common leaded gasoline, which would foul the turbine's internal parts with deposits. Chrysler's representatives made a show of this multi-fuel capability at press events. Famously, at one demonstration in Paris, a Chrysler exec poured a bottle of French perfume into the tank to prove the car would run on it. And during a world tour of one turbine car, the president of Mexico, Adolfo López Mateos, asked if the car could run on tequila, his country's signature spirit. Taking up the challenge, Chrysler engineers back in Detroit tested the turbine on straight tequila and confirmed it worked. They then filled the car's tank with several bottles of tequila and gave the president a thrilling demonstration ride with tequila for fuel. The car didn't miss a beat. These stunts made headlines and solidified the turbine car's image as a machine almost too good to be true. A car that could run on anything and symbolized American engineering creativity. Yet the turbine car was still a car, and it had to perform like one. On the road, it was smooth as silk. Turbine power has virtually no vibration, so the ride felt luxurious. It had respectable, if not sports car acceleration. About 12 seconds, 0 to 60 miles per hour, roughly on par with a typical sedan of the day. There was a slight lag when you hit the accelerator, about a 1 to 2 second wait for the turbine to spool up. A quirk drivers had to get used to. The exhaust, interestingly, came out much cooler than a normal car's. At idle, the exhaust gases were only about 180 degrees Fahrenheit, so cool you could put your hand in them without harm. Despite jokes at the time, the exhaust would not blow out flames or melt pedestrians' shoes. It was actually gentler than a piston car's in many respects. The interior of the car was as special as the engine. Stepping inside, you were greeted by bronze-colored leather seats and thick bronze carpeting to match the exterior. The dashboard had 3 big gauges: a speedometer, a tachometer, scaled up to an eye-popping 46,000 revolutions per minute, and a pyrometer to monitor turbine temperature. It was a blend of familiar 1960s luxury and space-age flair. By all accounts, the Chrysler Turbine Car looked and felt like a vision of the future. Act 2, the climax. In fall of 1963, Chrysler pulled the wraps off its fleet of 50 turbine cars and did something unprecedented. They handed these cars over to the American public. This was the user program, an elaborate public beta test to see how turbine technology would fare in real-world, day-to-day driving. Starting in October 1963, Chrysler began lending the turbine cars to regular drivers around the country for 3-month intervals. There was no charge to the users. Aside from fuel, Chrysler even covered insurance. The only requirements were that participants had to keep a driving log, conduct in-depth interviews with Chrysler engineers when their turn was up, and of course, treat the rare car with care. Demand to be a tester was huge. Who wouldn't want a free jet car for a few months? Chrysler ultimately selected 203 drivers in 133 cities, from Los Angeles to small towns, aiming for a broad sample. The lucky few were a diverse mix, men and women ages 21 to 70, though about 60% of them were already Chrysler owners. For each new tester, Chrysler arranged a personal delivery of the turbine car. It often arrived on a transporter, gleaming in bronze. Technicians would train the new users on the quirks of starting and operating the turbine. Then, the keys were handed over. Imagine the scene. Neighbors gathered around to watch this space-age machine fire up in the driveway with a whoosh. Over the next 90 days, that ordinary family would use the turbine car for everything: commuting, grocery runs, road trips, giving the turbine perhaps its greatest trial by fire. Many users reported that driving the turbine car was a delight on the open road. It was smooth and steady, with a robust mid-range power for highway cruising. The absence of vibration meant long trips were less tiring than in a conventional car. One of those subtle benefits that really made an impression. And on cold mornings, the turbine would start reliably. No finicky chokes or stalling, and even provided almost instant heat for the cabin and defrost, thanks to the hot turbine exhaust being routed for warming, a welcome perk for winter drivers. Of course, the turbine car had its downsides in daily use, and the public testers discovered them. The most common complaint was acceleration lag and performance. Some drivers found the car slow off the line, especially compared to the popular V8 muscle cars emerging in the mid-60s. If you stomped the accelerator, there was that brief pause before the turbine really powered up. So jackrabbit starts were basically impossible. Fuel economy was another sore point. Despite Chrysler's improvements, the turbine engine tended to guzzle fuel. Users found the mileage was subpar compared to regular cars. One interviewer called it poor fuel economy, especially given the high hopes for efficiency. And then there was the noise. While the turbine was fairly quiet at idle and cruising, under load, it had a loud turbo whoosh that not everyone loved. About 1/5 of users reported they or their neighbors found the jet-like sound bothersome. On top of that, because leaded gasoline was off limits, finding fuel could be a chore. Many users ran the car on diesel or kerosene or even home heating oil, which in the 1960s wasn't available at every corner gas station. Some resorted to filling up at truck stops or using drums of kerosene delivered for home furnaces. This inconvenience was noted in the feedback. Ironically, the car could run on many things, but not the standard leaded gas every station sold at the time. Crucially, the user program also exposed some reliability issues and learning curves. The turbine engines proved to be durable in the long run. They could run tens of thousands of miles with little wear, but only if treated right. Several users had trouble with the complex starting sequence. If you didn't follow it properly, you could overheat, torch the engine on startup, causing internal damage. Chrysler recorded multiple instances of turbine engines getting damaged this way and needing repair or replacement during the program. In fact, every single one of the 50 cars needed at least one engine rebuild or swap during the trial, often due to user error in starting, a testament to how foreign this new technology was to average drivers. Other reported issues included starter motor failures at high altitudes, thin air made ignition trickier, and occasional fuel system hiccups. But as the program went on, Chrysler's engineers implemented fixes and improvements. They trimmed the turbine's downtime for maintenance or repair from 4% of the time down to just 1% by the end of the program, meaning the cars were on the road 99% of the time, a solid achievement for an experimental fleet. Despite the snags, public reaction remained largely positive and curious. Surveys and interviews from the 203 test drivers revealed what they liked most: the turbine car's remarkable smoothness, lack of vibration, easy cold weather starting, and reduced maintenance needs. No oil changes needed. The engine didn't contaminate its oil like a piston engine would. Many also just loved the attention. Driving a turbine car made you a minor celebrity in your town. People would flag you down to ask questions or just to hear the engine spin up. Chrysler basked in this attention, often showcasing the turbine cars at events. Two of the cars even spent time at the 1964 New York World's Fair, offering demonstration rides to the public around a track. It was a true moonshot program. Never before had an automaker given so many prototype cars to regular folks to test. Over about 2.5 years, the fleet of 50 turbine cars racked up over 1 million miles collectively. By January 1966, the user trial was winding down. The final participants returned their bronze beauties and filled out exit interviews. Chrysler had gathered a treasure trove of data on what worked and what didn't. The big question: was the turbine car ready for prime time? Would Chrysler put a turbine-powered model into full production based on this promising trial? Act 3, the dream fades. Even as the last turbine cars were cruising in public hands, storm clouds were gathering for Chrysler's bold experiment. In April 1966, with the user program concluded, Chrysler executives announced that no matter what, the 50 test cars were coming back to the barn. Turbine or no turbine in the future, the public wasn't going to keep them. That was a clear sign. In the end, Chrysler decided not to pursue mass production of the turbine car. The reasons were numerous and, in hindsight, unsurprising. While the concept had proved technically viable, practical and economic realities were another matter. For one, the cost to build each turbine car was astronomical. Each hand-built car may have cost Chrysler as much as $50,000 in 1960s dollars, over $500,000 today. The engine alone used exotic metals and precision casting processes. It was said Chrysler never even revealed the true per-engine cost. No matter how much they refined it, a turbine engine was never going to be as cheap to manufacture as a mass-produced V8. Secondly, fuel economy remained mediocre. Test cars averaged well below the MPG of comparably sized conventional cars. As the 1960s rolled on, concerns about fuel efficiency and soon emissions were growing. The turbine's emissions profile turned out to be a double-edged sword. It ran very clean in terms of unburned hydrocarbons, no raw gasoline smell, and even its exhaust heat was lower. But it ran extremely hot internally, which led to high nitrogen oxide, NOx, emissions that were hard to curb. With new federal emissions regulations looming by the late 60s, the turbine struggled to comply. The U.S. Department of Commerce even issued a report in 1967 concluding that turbine engines were unsuited to automobiles given the state of the art. It was a harsh verdict. The turbine car dream, they implied, just wasn't practical. Then there were the broader economic and political forces. Chrysler Corporation itself hit a rough patch as the 1960s turned into the 1970s. The company invested over 2 decades in turbine development, and though they made amazing strides, there was still no production car to show, only sunk R&D costs. In the early 1970s, the first oil crisis hit, and suddenly fuel economy and emissions were paramount concerns, areas where the turbine was at a disadvantage. Chrysler did soldier on with their turbine research a bit longer. They developed 5th and 6th generation turbine engines through the late 60s and 70s, even fitting some into test cars like a Dodge Aspen sedan. The U.S. government's Environmental Protection Agency gave Chrysler a contract in the early 70s to try to develop a cleaner, more efficient turbine for cars. But progress was slow and funds were tight. By 1979, Chrysler was in dire financial straits. The company was literally on the brink of bankruptcy. To secure a federal bailout, the famous Loan Guarantee Act of 1979, new CEO Lee Iacocca had to slash any projects not essential to survival. The turbine program, still not production ready after all those years, was an obvious casualty. Chrysler's turbine engine program was formally ended in 1979 as a condition of the bailout, sealing the coffin on the dream. Long before that official end, however, the turbine car fleet itself met a sad fate. Once the public testing was over in 1966, Chrysler had 50 very expensive, non-standard automobiles on its hands. These cars couldn't be sold to consumers. They didn't fully meet safety or emissions standards, and Chrysler didn't want to maintain them indefinitely. So in 1967, with a heavy heart and perhaps an eye on accounting, Chrysler decided to destroy the majority of the turbine cars. One by one, the sleek bronze coupes were taken to a scrapyard south of Detroit, lined up and crushed, their pioneering turbine engines gutted and their handcrafted bodies smashed. Of the 55 cars built, 50 user program cars plus 5 earlier prototypes, only 9 were spared. Chrysler kept 2 for itself, 6 were donated to museums, and 1 was set aside for a private collector, more on him later. The rest, 46 cars in all, were gone. Why destroy them? Over the years, a rumor spread that Chrysler did it to avoid a hefty import tax on the gear-built Italian bodies. But historians have largely debunked that story. The real reasons were more straightforward. The turbine cars were never approved for sale, and auto companies routinely scrapped prototypes to avoid liability and logistics issues. Chrysler was worried about public relations, too. They didn't want the few turbine cars falling into disrepair, or even worse, someone swapping a cheap V8 into a turbine car shell and ruining the exotic image. As one Chrysler executive put it bluntly at the time, "Our main objective is research, and we did not want turbines turning up on used car lots." In other words, better to end the program with a clean slate than have a handful of orphan turbine cars running around without support, possibly undermining the project's reputation. Decades later, General Motors would do something eerily similar by crushing all its EV1 electric cars in 2003, when that program ended. A controversial move, but one that echoed what Chrysler did in the 60s. And so, by the late 1960s, the great turbine car experiment was effectively over. The fleet was mostly gone. Development work quietly continued in labs for a while. But the jet-age automotive dream had stalled. The Chrysler Turbine Car, once heralded on magazine covers and TV programs as the car of tomorrow, would not see a showroom or a customer's garage. It was an idea ahead of its time, or perhaps an idea whose time simply never came. Act 4, the aftermath. After the turbine program's ignoble end, Chrysler moved on to more immediate concerns, like surviving the turbulent 1970s market. But the turbine car was not entirely forgotten. Of the 9 surviving cars, most became museum pieces, literal monuments to a dream deferred. Today you can find Chrysler turbine cars on display at institutions like the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles, and others. Each stands as a retro-futuristic jewel in those collections, usually painted in that distinctive turbine bronze, often displayed with the hood open so you can see the miracle turbine engine inside. Interestingly, all the turbine cars given to museums were disabled. Chrysler removed vital internal parts, the fan blades of the turbine, to ensure the engines could not be run again. Perhaps this was out of caution, or liability concerns, or simply to preserve them. This means if you see a turbine car in a museum, it's for your eyes only. You won't hear that jet engine sound. Chrysler itself held on to 2 cars. One of those was kept operable for many years and occasionally taken out for events or testing. At the now closed Walter P. Chrysler Museum in Michigan, a turbine car was a star exhibit, and they even started it up for special occasions, treating visitors to its jet-like whir. The single privately owned turbine car went to a man well known among car buffs, comedian Jay Leno, one of the world's foremost car collectors. Leno acquired his turbine car in the 2000s and, with the help of dedicated experts, got it running and driving. In his garage, the turbine car is maintained in fully operational condition, making it one of the only turbine cars in the world that can still be driven under its own power. Leno has featured it on his TV show, delighting in how smooth it drives and demonstrating that signature whoop on camera for new generations of enthusiasts. What became of the turbine engine concept after Chrysler bowed out? In the automotive world, no other company would invest as heavily in turbines for passenger cars again, at least not in the 20th century. The Chrysler Turbine program did inspire and inform others to some degree. American Motors, AMC, briefly toyed with a turbine concept, and General Motors built the Firebird concept cars in the 1950s, which were turbine-powered, though purely for show. Overseas, Britain's Rover Company had a small program, even entering a turbine-powered car at the 24 Hours of Le Mans race in 1963. But like Chrysler's, these efforts were ultimately shelved. One place turbine engines did find a home was in heavy vehicles. Notably, the American M1 Abrams tank, introduced in the 1980s, uses a multi-fuel turbine engine, essentially a distant cousin of the turbine car's power plant, but in a 60-ton tank. The Abrams turbine, like Chrysler's, can burn everything from jet fuel to diesel to gasoline. It delivers incredible power and guzzles incredible fuel, much as the turbine car did. Chrysler's own turbine team, disbanded in 1979, didn't completely give up their passion. Notably, the engineer Sam B. Williams, one of the key figures behind the turbine car's engine, went on to advance turbine technology in other arenas. His company, Williams International, became a leading maker of small jet engines for cruise missiles and business jets. Decades later, Williams's firm even helped fabricate new replacement turbine parts to keep the remaining Chrysler turbine cars running, essentially reverse engineering pieces from the 1960s using modern tech and the memories of retired Chrysler engineers. It's a wonderful epilogue, The very people who built these engines, many now in their old age, ensuring the legacy literally stays alive by helping museums and collectors maintain the last of the turbines. Act 5, The Legacy. How is the Chrysler Turbine Car remembered today? In a word, fondly. For many car enthusiasts and history buffs, it represents a high point of automotive imagination, a time when a major American car company dared to reach for the sky, or rather the jet stream, and almost made it work. The turbine car has attained a near mythic status as the car that could have changed everything. It's often cited as one of the coolest cars ever built in America, despite, or because of, the fact that regular people never got to buy one. Those who were involved in the original program or lucky enough to drive one still recount the experience with a sparkle in their eyes, the way it sounded and felt so different from anything before or since. To this day at classic car shows, a Chrysler Turbine Car will draw a crowd like few other 1960s cars can. The Turbine Car's legacy is also bittersweet. Of course, it remains a symbol of unfulfilled promise. Detroit's jet-powered dream that vanished. Some see it as a noble failure, an engineering dead end that, while technologically fascinating, just wasn't meant for the mass market, much like other innovative dead ends of the era, from rotary engines to early electric cars. Yet calling it a failure feels unfair, given how much it achieved. The Turbine Car program taught invaluable lessons. It pushed the boundaries of materials, the exotic alloys needed to handle 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit turbine temperatures, and heat recycling technology. Chrysler's engineers pioneered the use of regenerators to make turbines more efficient. Many of the patents and ideas from the turbine program found use in other industries, and it showcased the idea of alternative fuels long before climate change made that a common goal. In a sense, the turbine car was an early alternative fuel vehicle, able to run on biofuels or synthetics if needed. Culturally, the Chrysler Turbine Car encapsulates the zeitgeist of the early 1960s. It was the space age on wheels, debuting just as Americans were gazing toward the moon. No surprise, then, that Chrysler aggressively promoted the turbine car's futuristic image in the media. The car even had a brief brush with Hollywood. One of the turbine cars, painted white with blue racing stripes, appears in the 1964 film The Lively set, in a dramatic drag race scene. Audiences who saw that film got to witness a bit of movie magic, a turbine-powered car speeding against a dragster on the big screen. It cemented the turbine car's status as an icon of its time, a physical embodiment of American techno-optimism. In the end, the Chrysler Turbine Car's greatest legacy might be the lasting fascination it inspires. Enthusiasts still talk about it, write books about it, and ensure that the surviving examples are treasured. In 2023, for instance, one of the museum-kept turbine cars was painstakingly restored to running condition for demonstration runs, allowing a new generation to hear that turbine whine in person, a sound that instantly transports you back to 1964. Videos of Jay Leno firing up his turbine car rack up hundreds of thousands of views, proof that the allure of a jet-powered car is still as strong as ever. The turbine car has also become a case study in what might have been. What if Chrysler had solved the fuel economy problem, or if emissions rules had been a bit less strict? Could we all be driving turbine-powered cars today? Probably not. Even optimists admit that the turbine's advantages might never have overcome the practical hurdles for everyday cars. But the idea of it captivates the imagination. A car that glides smoothly with a muffled roar, burning almost any fuel you pour in, with a sci-fi whine under the hood. Detroit's jet-powered dream ultimately vanished, but it left behind an enduring story. The Chrysler Turbine Car stands as a testament to an era when innovation knew no bounds, when engineers and executives were willing to try something bold and risky in the quest for a better automobile. Its bronze sheen may have dulled in memory, but the legend of the turbine car continues to shine brightly. In museums and private collections, a few of these machines still exist, reminding us of a time when the future was wide open and sounded like a jet engine. The turbine car's tale is a poignant one in automotive history, a brilliant burst of innovation, an ambitious program that almost changed the industry, and a legacy that endures as a symbol of dreams unrealized but never forgotten. In the saga of the Chrysler Turbine Car, we find a rich narrative of hope, innovation, and eventual heartbreak. From the moment that first turbine whirred to life in a Plymouth, to the gleaming fleet handed out to curious Americans, to the silent scrapyard where most met their end, it's a story that resonates with anyone who loves cars or history. The turbine car asked, "What if our cars were more like jet engines?" And for a moment it seemed not just possible, but imminent. It didn't conquer the highways as Chrysler dreamed, but it certainly earned a place in automotive lore. Today, the turbine car is a reminder of the grand visions that occasionally emerge from the auto industry, visions that push the envelope, even if they don't quite reach production. Its influence can be felt in the continuing search for the next big propulsion technology, whether that's electric, hydrogen, or perhaps one day turbines again. As a narrator of this tale, I invite you to imagine one of those turbine cars in its heyday, gliding down Main Street, USA, a sound like a distant jet following it, heads turning, children pointing in awe, the smell of something unusual, perhaps French perfume, in its exhaust. It was rolling proof that the future was here, or at least could be, if we dared to grab it. The Chrysler Turbine Car may have vanished from the roads, but its story keeps igniting our imagination. In that sense, the turbine dream still hums on. A turbine engine never truly goes silent. It only awaits the next spark of inspiration to roar back to life.